What's going on, guys? Cassie from Jeep Gear and Gadgets.
And Ben.
In my last video, we talked about the upcoming axle swap that we're doing. We are throwing JK axles underneath the LJ. Now, I know it's been a while since I did that video. Work's been crazy, but luckily with this coronavirus, I am... Stay away.
Miller Lite virus.
Luckily, I'm working remote for the next few weeks, which means I have more time at home, which means there's time to work on the axle swap. And I think the only way to get this series started is to just start it up. Start it up. Most of you guys know what the current setup is on here. I've got a Dana 30 in the front, Dana 44 in the rear, running on 35s. Now the axles, they're completely stock. They're not re-geared. There's no lockers, and they're not beefed up in any way.
They're straight vegan. Vegan axles.
Vegan axles.
Pair that with the 35s and it's
not the best setup for what I want to be doing. Now, do people run the Dana 30 and Dana 44 with 35s? Yes, people do it. They off-road with it. It's a good setup.
The 44 is a great axle. I mean, it's a Dana 44. It's good, but it's not the best 44. That's all I was gonna say. You can turn it to you.
Back to me. Now I could just beef up the axles that are currently under it. I could add truss, lockers, re-gear it, axle shafts. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could do. But I already have a set of JK axles ready to go. So why don't we go check those out? We have a Dynatrac 44 front and a Rubicon 44 rear. Now these axles were underneath Ben's JK back before we did the 1-ton swap. And as you can tell, they're already pretty beefed up. We have 513 gears, lockers, RCD axle shafts. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. They're overall just a better axle than what's underneath the LJ right now. And there's a lot of benefits to the JK axle. They're wider, they're stronger, better steering, bigger brakes. I could go on and on about the benefits to the JK axles over the LJ axles, but I would rather wait until the LJ axles are out here so we can see those differences side by side. You'll also notice that these are not direct bolt-on axles. We're gonna have to do a lot of work to them. It's not gonna be a cheap swap, but it's a good platform for anyone looking to do a 44 swap under their LJ or TJ. So I think the next step is to just get this project started. Pull the LJ under here and just start taking that front axle out. Getting the axle out from under the Jeep isn't that hard. All we're gonna do is jack up the axle, throw some frames under the frames, throw some jack stands under the frame, take the wheels and tires off, lower the axle down, and then just start taking things off. Now, one thing we're gonna do to make this a little easier is leave the brake calipers hanging. That way we don't lose all of our brake fluid. And then when it's time to swap in the new calipers, it's just easy as that. I think that's enough talking. I think it's time to get started. What do you think?
Here's some gloves. Let's do it.
Thank you. Now that the front axle's pulled out, we can look at the major differences between the Dana 30 and the Dynatrac 44. I mean, it's obvious the Dynatrac, the 44 is much larger. I mean, the axle is thicker, the housing is much larger, the steering knuckles are larger and beefier, and you have a designated spot for your tie rod and your drag link. The brakes are bigger, and there are some obvious mounting differences. So Ben, give us the rundown.
So normally when you're doing this swap, one of the easiest ways to do it would be, like, if you're starting off with a Rubicon housing or even a Dana 30 from a JK. The Dana 30 from a JK is gonna be stronger than a Dana 30 from a TJ. It's a new generation of axles, but you can't really just slide it under there because there's some major differences. Now, we are gonna be sliding it under because I don't wanna cut up a Dynatrac 40. I think Cassie already said that. So there's gonna be some drawbacks with doing that. Now, if you're starting this swap with JK axles, what I'd recommend is cutting all the brackets off your JK axle and then getting a swap truss kit. It's gonna make it easier. So, 7 Slot Customs sells a swap truss kit from a JK to a TJ or LJ. And what it's gonna do is, first of all, you're gonna get a truss, gonna strengthen it. Secondly, it puts all the mounts in the factory TJ location. Now, the only issue with running or using the JK 44 is that they only have 6 degrees of separation. So TJ's like a lot of caster. I think this axle has like 10 to 13 degrees of caster, whereas the JK's, if you're at a 0 pinion angle, it's gonna be 6 degrees caster. It's kind of low. Luckily with the aftermarket axles, we have 10 degrees of separation. So we're also moving from a low pinion axle to a high pinion, which means our pinion angle isn't gonna be as severe since it went from here. Suppose our drive shaft's here, one like this, we're now up here. So we can run less pinion angle and more caster. But if you're doing this with a JK axle, like stock, non-Dynatrac, nothing aftermarket, the best way to get the most caster out of it, it's gonna sound kind of crazy, maybe we should talk about this in another video, but you would actually cut the axle in half. So you pull the shafts out, everything. Cut the axle tube straight in half in the middle. You're gonna get some DOM tubing that has the inside thickness the same as the outside thickness, and you're gonna kind of externally sleeve it. So you can cut it, rotate more caster into the axle, and then plug weld and run a seam around the DOM tubing. So that sounds kind of crazy. Maybe we'll talk about that in another video. Maybe we can do it on this axle. I don't know. But that's pretty crazy. It's a good way to get more caster built in. I know I just talked everybody's ears off. But let's take a look at the actual mounting differences and why you might want to use a swap truss kit. So the spring pads themselves, right here from eye to eye is like 36.5 on the TJ. And then on the JK, this is gonna be rough. Let's see, it's right around 40. So that is 3.5 inches difference, like wider. So by sliding this in, our springs are gonna bow out a little bit. You know, it's about, total of 3.5. That'd be 1 3/4 inches on both sides. The springs are gonna bow out. I don't know, it might be a little too drastic, we'll see. Now there's also another thing with the spring. So on the TJ, as you can tell, if you look down here, the spring pad is actually not on the center line of the axle, right? So it's pushed forward a little bit. Boop, see what I'm saying? Now on the JKs, the spring pads are perfectly centered on the axle tube. So since we're not changing those mounts to be like these, it's naturally gonna push the axle forward, how much? About close to 2 inches. So we're gonna have a 2-inch stretch in the front, which is also gonna make things difficult because now we're gonna have to kind of either do adjustable control arms that are custom or some that really have the extended length because the TJ arms aren't gonna extend past long enough. Now, the upper control arm mounts are pretty similar. I think there's a tiny difference. Like right here, we're at like 20 3/4, and up here, it's like 19.5. So there's like an inch, but some adjustable control arms with bushings on the inside or like Johnny joints are gonna fix that issue. But I think that's enough talking. You'll kind of, this is what I do. I just keep talking. There's some major differences,
It's good information though.
There's a bunch of major differences. And if you plan on just kind of reusing the JK setup, it's gonna be a lot more custom work involved. Our shock mounts are different now. Track bar is gonna be different, but it's not gonna be hard. So I think the next thing is just roll it under.
Yeah, roll her under.
Roll it under and kind of see if this is even gonna work. We don't even know, so.
So the previous owner never installed bump stops. Luckily, Ben had some in the garage. They're for JK, but I think these will work.
It's the same.
Whoop,
Yep.
And she goes.
Boom. Let's do the other side.
Whoop. So we got the axle under the Jeep yesterday and we started putting all the parts back on, trying to figure out what we do need to change and what we don't need to change for this axle swap. And there are quite a few things that we need to modify. I'm gonna start with the control arms. Looking at the spring, the axle needs to go forward about 2 inches, which would make these control arms too short. The adjustable TJ control arms won't work either because they won't extend out as far as we need them to, which leaves us with 2 options. We can either custom make the control arms ourselves, or we can try and find a place that can custom make them for us. Next, looking at the spring, if we look at it from the front, you'll see that it's bowing just a little more than Ben and I had planned on it to. So that leaves us with 2 options to fix this as well. We can either move the coil bucket on the axle in, or we can move the coil bucket on the frame out, which is what we're going to do. So I've never seen that before. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it before. We have something pretty cool worked up and I'm excited to see how it works out. So now let's talk about the drag link and the track bar. The drag link, we're just gonna have to custom make it. It needs to be a specific length, so we're gonna do that ourselves. Order some parts and get that done. Now on the track bar, we put the adjustable rock crawler TJ track bar back on here just to see if it would work, and it is too long even on the shortest setting. So we are going to have to custom make this one as well. Also, when we think about having to move the axle 2 inches forward, that means this track bar bracket is going to literally hit the axle. So we're gonna have to cut it off and remount a new one onto the frame, whoopsies, and remount a new one onto the frame a little further up so it gets out of the way of the axle. Since we're on this side, talking about shocks. So we're putting a JK axle on here, which means we have a JK mount on the bottom and a TJ mount on the top, which is also the same as a JK. So JK shocks are going to work under here. What we're gonna do is order 2-door JK shocks because they should be valved the same. And I think that's what we're gonna do. We don't know which ones we're gonna go with yet though. In order to keep this project as budget friendly as possible, we're going to reuse the drive shaft that we have in here right now. We're just gonna order a new axle yoke so it can fit our old drive shaft. Now let's take a look at brakes. On the other side, we went ahead and mocked up the Clayton Off-Road TJ extended brake line and it hooked right up to the JK caliper. However, looking at these brakes, they've been sitting in the yard for almost a year, maybe more, and it's time to get new brakes. I don't know if we're gonna go with the standard brake replacement or if we're gonna upgrade to something like Power Stop. As you can see, along with the brakes and all of our other projects, we have a lot of updates we need to do. We have a lot of parts we need to go inside and order because I am freezing right now outside. That about wraps it up for this video, guys. Once we go inside and order all the parts and those start coming in, we can start on our next video and put the axle back together. Now, if you have any ideas, tips, tricks, or any comments at all, go down below and let me know. And as always, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and my name's Cassie, and keep Jeep and classy. See you in the next episode.